Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Mnemonic Tutor here with a new in-depth video in the budget gaming PC series. This one has to do with the Ryzen 5 2400G micro PC that we built. Don't forget to like this video, comment, subscribe to the channel, and hit that bell icon to get notified when I drop new videos. So let's start this video off talking about the actual PC build itself. This is a gaming PC, low-end budget gaming PC based on the Ryzen 5 2400G processor from AMD. That's an APU, meaning it has a GPU built into the CPU, so you don't need an additional graphics card. Just one chip does everything for you. Everything is housed inside of an in-win Chopin case. This is a budget case under $100 that includes a 150 watt power supply in it. Now, 150 watts is more than enough for this build. The highest wattage we saw consumed during Prime 95 stress testing was 108.6 watts. Final Fantasy 15 benchmark was 104.5 watts. Cinebench R20 was 98.5 watts and Unigent Heaven was 88.2 watts. All other gaming capture was far below this, so we don't need bigger than 150 watt power supply. The next thing we used was the Gigabyte GA AB350N gaming Wi-Fi motherboard. This is a micro ATX motherboard that fits perfectly inside this tiny case. It's not really available brand new anymore, but it was a budget ITX board. There are plenty other budget ITX boards you can buy today. I'll list some in the description section, but for this build, it was the Gigabyte board. The next thing I used in this build was 32 gigs of Corsair LPX RAM, LPX being low profile RAM. The reason I wanted low profile is because this had to fit into this micro case, and also you don't need 32 gigs. The sweet spot here is 16 gigs of RAM because the APU uses about 2 gigs of RAM for its GPU processing, so keep it at 16. Now for the heart of the build, this is a Ryzen 5 2400G APU or processor, meaning it has the GPU built in, so you don't need an additional graphics card. This is an awesome processor, 4-core, 8 threads, and while you can still pick it up rather cheap, there is a newer version, a Ryzen 5 3400G that is about 10% faster. I don't have one of those on hand, which is why I use the 2400G, but if you're gonna buy new, look at the 3400G first and then only get the 2400G if you can get a really good discount from what the 3400G costs. Now, as far as the main storage for this machine, I have two different drives in here, a 256 gig NVMe SSD and a 1TB SATA SSD. That being said, the only reason I have it this way is because I had a spare NVMe that was small sitting on the shelf in addition to the 1TB SATA SSD. If you want to cut the budget by a little bit here, you can go ahead and just use the 1TB SATA SSD and skip the NVMe. Or if you want to have a bigger NVMe, you can cut the SATA SSD and spend a little bit more and go to like a 1TB NVMe. Either way is fine. Nowadays, the price difference is probably around $20 between SATA and an NVMe, and the NVMe is better. But if you're on a really tight budget, you can just skip the NVMe drive entirely. So what does this cost? Well, the case is around $80 to $100 depending on where you get it. The CPU is around $150. Sometimes you get it less. RAM is about $75 for 16 gigs. Again, don't do the 32 gig that I did here. This is just what I had left on my shelf. Motherboard is around $100. The SSD is about $50, the NVMe one, and the SATA SSD is about $120. So total all in on this build, $575. If you cut away the NVMe SSD, it's $525, which is a really good price for what this machine is. So let's talk about native gaming on this PC. And by native gaming, I mean the game is actually running on the PC itself. It's not running in the cloud or some other place like a remote play on Steam or anything like that. This is just on the machine itself. We're gonna do a couple of games and a benchmark. The 4 games we're gonna cover here are Magic the Gathering Arena, League of Legends, Fortnite, and CSGO. Now let me warn you ahead of time, I'm not a Fortnite or a CSGO player or a League of Legends player. I do play Arena, so that one you'll see is okay, but the rest of them, I'm just doing this for the benchmark. Don't judge me on my FPS skills. So let's start off with what's already playing here in the background. This is the Final Fantasy 15 benchmark. And for this video, I've included the 1280 by 720 resolution with a light graphics setting. This benchmark lets you do light, standard, and high. And I did do light, standard, and high as far as screen cap on both 720p and 1080p. For this video, we're only going to show the 720p Lite because that was the most playable, and you'll see here it ranges from 30 to 40, maybe even 50 FPS. I don't think we get to 60, but the other ones are varying levels of playability. And again, I will release separate videos for each of these benchmarks and games individually, but for this video, this is what we're going to keep it at. And as you can see, it's completely playable. Yes, it's not 60 FPS, it's not 120 FPS, but it's perfectly playable. And again, this is running on the actual machine itself, native gameplay. This is not a cloud streaming service. This is on the machine itself. One of the things I'll call you to note is at the very top line, it shows you the GPU metrics. We're at between 50, 60 C in terms of the temperature, but the actual usage of the GPU is 99%, so it is fully taxed at this point. Just keep that in mind. And now we move on to Magic the Gathering Arena. And just to let you know, you can see that there's no overlay here from MSI Afterburner, and the reason for that is when I did this the first time to capture it, it was at 60 frames per second, 1920 by 1080p on ultra settings. Every setting I put this game at, it didn't matter. It ran at 60 FPS locked non-stop. So as far as performance for this game, it literally doesn't matter because it's going to be perfect every time. And as you can see here, the card animations, the transitions, everything is perfect. So Magic the Gathering Arena is an excellent candidate if you like to play these type of games on budget gaming PCs. This build is perfect for this. And now we roll into League of Legends, and I'm not an LOL player, so this is just the training part, but as you can see, we're at 130, 140 FPS in a very congested section. This game runs from around 130 to about 230 depending on what you're doing, how congested the scene is or whatever, but again, an APU with a built-in GPU can do well in excess of 100 frames per second on a game like League of Legends. So if you're an LOL player and you want a budget gaming PC, this is an excellent choice for you. Now let's take a look at Fortnite. As you can see, I have it set here to 1920 by 1080, windowed full screen, 120 FPS cap. It's auto set, custom quality preset. It did it on its own, but as you can see, view distance is far, shadows out, a whole bunch of stuff is high. So I don't know that this is the highest setting, but it's definitely a high setting. And right now, as we're about to load into the map, it's around 30, 40 FPS. Sometimes it dips down into the high 20s. I'll do a cut in a second. We'll go to the section where we have a little bit of shooting, but even though the FPS is around 30 frames per second here, you can see that the quality actually looks really good, and even when we're in a fight, it's still in the 30s, so it's very playable. It's, again, not 100 plus FPS like you might want if you're a competitive Fortnite player, but if you're just trying to play this game on a budget and you don't really care that the FPS is super high, you just want it to be playable where it's not stuttering and whatnot, we're on pretty high settings here and it's completely playable. And we'll finish up the live game cap section here with a little bit of CSGO. Again, don't make fun of my skills, I'm not a CSGO player. But as you can see, we're at 80 to 90, sometimes over 100 FPS, and I think you probably expected that for CSGO because it's an old game. But again, if you're a competitive CSGO player, I shouldn't say competitive, you're a semi-competitive CSGO player and you just care that you're above 60 FPS, this Ryzen 5 2400G APU is an excellent choice for a budget build for a CSGO gaming machine. So now we're going to move into cloud gaming, which is where this machine really shines. Because it's got a GPU built in with a CPU, it's able to render in 4K with no problem. So gaming at 1080p, if your game is actually running in the cloud, is perfectly fine on this machine and works very well. We're going to show you two different services here. We're going to show you Nvidia GeForce Now and Google Stadia. Both of these cloud services are pretty good. The performance is pretty good. They're fairly new and they're still evolving, so keep that in mind when you see like a couple little stutters or here and there. But overall, the games are completely playable, and you'll see that even with FPSs, games are 100% playable in this scenario. What you've been watching thus far is Nvidia GeForce Now, and as you can see, it looks pretty good. We're about to jump to Stadia here in a few seconds, but I just want you to look at what this renders at. It is at full 60 frames per second because this game is actually running in the cloud and not on your local machine. So now we're jumping over to Google Stadia, and as you can see, the quality is, I feel, better in terms, maybe not fidelity is better, but a lot less stutter, a lot less artifacting, and cloud gaming, you know, is the new thing, right? And it's still evolving. It's brand new. It's still coming around. It's not quite, you know, perfect yet, but eventually everyone's going to be doing it. So this is just kind of showing that if you have your gaming system, quote unquote, in the cloud, meaning the machine that the game is actually running on is not your machine, then the device that you're playing it on sort of doesn't matter. So this gaming PC can do, you know, low-end games really well, super high FPS. But what this is showing is even if you want to play a little bit better of a game, or not better, but a little bit more high-end of a game, a little bit like a AAA title that requires a lot more horsepower, you can just run it in the cloud in GeForce Now or Stadia and still play it on your same PC. So it's dependent on your internet connection though, so that does kind of matter, but for the most part, I think most people who have like cable internet will be okay. Maybe DSL might not be too good unless you have a high-end plan, but for most people, it should be okay. So as you can see, it looks excellent, completely playable, and it is streaming at 60 frames per second. So let's get into the pros and cons of this build, whether or not I would build it again, and that kind of stuff. And we'll start with the cons. The first con is the 2400G is an $150 processor. That's not expensive, but that's also not cheap. Considering there are other processors out there like the 1600AF that's actually a 6-core processor for $85, if you're just talking about processor to processor, that's not really a good deal. But you have to consider that the 2400G has an APU built in, or I should say a GPU that allows you to use it without a graphics card, and the 1600AF does not. You would have to pair a graphics card to it. And even if you got the cheapest one, let's just say a $200 GPU, you're now at almost double the price. So it kind of depends on what you're looking to do, and the next con will actually kind of drive that a little bit. So the second con is the case is actually very small, meaning you cannot fit a GPU in there. As a matter of fact, you actually have to remove the AMD shroud around the CPU fan to get it to fit underneath the grate on the side of the case. It fits fine without that shroud, and the shroud does not impact the cooling or the performance at all. But the fact is that you cannot add anything to this machine. So upgrading it is literally only upgrading the APU, not adding anything on. So if you want an upgrade path and you want to be able to say start with this processor using the built-in GPU and then upgrade later, this is not the right case for you. Even though this case comes with a power supply in it and it's under $100, which is great, it's not going to be for those who want to upgrade over time. You're better off getting like an NZXT H200 case and using it without a GPU for now, save up some money, then you can add a GPU in later. If you use this small case that I used to build it, that means you're going to have to buy a new case when it's time to upgrade. So that's kind of a trade-off there, right? This case has a built-in PSU and it's $80. Otherwise, you're going to have to go with an NZXT case that's probably around $60, $70, $80 by itself, and then buy a separate $30, $40 PSU. So flexibility is kind of something to consider here, but it is what it is, and those are the cons. Moving on to the pros. There's a lot of pros here. Overall, it's a very low price. Again, because you're getting an $80 case with a built-in PSU that powers this thing perfectly. It's super tiny and it fits anywhere. I literally have it inside of an IKEA Kallax shelf in a cube. Super tiny. It's very quiet and low power consumption. There's only one fan in here. I don't know if the PSU has a fan because it's so small, but I definitely can't hear one in there. So I believe there's only one fan and it's a CPU fan, and it's fairly quiet. It's the perfect size for an HTPC. So if you're looking for a system that's both a low-end gaming box, say connected to your TV in the living room, and you want to stream like 4K content on Netflix, this is a perfect size for that. The other thing is that this PC can actually do a lot of multitasking. I did some video editing on it with DaVinci Resolve. I did some audio recording and editing, and it's perfectly fine. It's 4 cores and 8 threads, so it's about as powerful as any mainstream laptop you're going to see out there with that same core count. So it's not going to be as powerful as like one of these 8 core, 16 thread laptops, gaming laptops, but it does perfectly fine for that. And if you're a YouTuber, this is a perfect editing machine on top of everything else. So would I build it again? Absolutely. For me, this thing makes perfect sense. I love the fact that I can stick it inside of a Kallax shelf and use it however I want to, whenever I want to, and I can put it away in a closet or something and not have to worry about it. It's not a big build. However, as I mentioned earlier, if you want an upgrade path, if you want to start with a 2400G or a 3400G and then upgrade later by adding a GPU, this is not the right case. The build is fine, the CPU is fine, everything else is fine, just don't use this case. Overall, this little PC is amazing considering its size and price. If you like content like this, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon to get notified when I drop new videos. If there are any areas about this build or games that you want me to do an expanded video on, please let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.